Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Winback, and on today's episode of RPG Radio, we're tackling some more Grim Dawn lore in our ultimate lore through, starting down our path towards the end of the fourth act of the game, which ultimately ends the base game experience. So, if you don't have the Ashes of Malmeth expansion or the Forgotten Gods expansion, you're still within the realm of understanding for all the lore that should still be going on in this playthrough. Actually, you know what? We're going to see a couple things that expand out into Forgotten Gods, and I'm not sure if it's because of the expansion that they exist or if they just exist in the base game experience, because I never played this game without the expansions. So you know what? We'll leave that to some internet detective to correct me on if they exist. In the comments, feel free to let me know if that is what's going to happen. But no spoilers here until we get to that part in the video. As it is right now, we just cleared Port Valbury, dealing with Van Eldritch and his Council of Horrors in a city beset on all sides and even from within. Port Valbury being the apocalyptic nightmare and a huge stronghold of ethereal forces, as is Malmeth. So, those two being the biggest seats of ethereal power in the entire game, they have the biggest presence of ethereal enemies. That being said, we're focusing on the, I don't know if we can call it the base of operations, because the Cult of Chthon is very interlaced with the normal population of Cairn, but we'll be heading towards where they have their biggest seat of power, at least in the world. Now, you might notice when you're playing throughout this part of the game that the setting, the whole landscape really takes on a much different tone. And I don't mean that in just the metaphorical sense. The game literally gets more red. It becomes darker because the enemies that you're facing off against are not only dark and demonic, but they all crave the blood of the human beings of Cairn, and all of that blood is to be sent back to Chthon to make him whole, to repent in a way for our countless misdeeds as a species. We are to set the counter back to 0 and give the blood back to Chthon, which takes us down an entirely new route of lore avenues. In the library of lore that is Grim Dawn, Chthon actually plays a very foundational role. So let's take a deeper look at the character. Not even character. I think at this point it's easier to call him a presence. So since this video is pretty lacking in lore notes, I'm actually going to pull this from the wiki. The Grim Dawn wiki actually has tons of really cool lore information, so I highly recommend that you check it out if you're interested in that type of thing from this game. But according to the lore of Chthon, in an age preceding the creation of the mortal planes, an elder god was betrayed by his children, his body torn apart and drained of blood so that they could use its power to breathe life into their own creations. His remains were cast out of creation into a void. Incapable of death, however, the god lingered on in the darkness, doomed to an eternity of pain and madness. Feeling the suffering and death of all mortal things that were given life from his blood. His name forgotten by time, the dying god is known only as Chthon, he who dwells below creation. Now, if that wasn't enough for you, there are quite a few things that really pique my interest, so if you're a lore nerd like myself, you might be intrigued as well. One thing I'll mention, however, that was not in the note, but does come from the lore both in the wiki and over on the Crate forums, where there is huge discussion all the time about the lore and about the story for this game, is that Chthon is what's known as a primordial being. And when we say that, the whole elder god archetype comes into play. One of the beings who existed before Cairn, before everything that we know, before the scope of Grim Dawn as a game is really delved into. So, what that means is that Kymon is essentially the oldest being, or one of the oldest beings that we have a frame of reference for in this game. And there are a number of other beings in the game as well that would fit that, we'll say, age range. But as far as we know right now in the game, Kymon is the oldest being, albeit he is in pieces and has been used to basically seed our world in the game. All the people, all the life forms, everything stems from Kymon and his blood, and as such he has been suffering in the void dimension, completely separate from our own, but still feeling all of our pain because everything that exists is from his blood. He can feel it all, he experiences it all in a capacity that he has absolutely nothing to do about it. Now, inevitably, this is just a crash course in the entity known as Kymon and all of the followers, everything that we know about the world and the creation of Cairn and the Grim Dawn universe. But if you need more than that, I highly recommend checking out the Crate forums, because one of the developers, I believe his name is Zantai, frequents those posts quite a bit to sprinkle little, we'll call them nuggets of truth, about how Grim Dawn's lore works, how it's all interconnected. Doesn't obviously want to make it any less vague than it is currently, because I'm sure that there is quite a bit of lore going into Grim Dawn 2 that will make things more clear, or maybe just make them even more vague. This is a textbook Dark Souls type universe, so it's gritty, it's post-apocalyptic, everything is pain, and the only way to really create hope within the game is through your character. You breathe a life into this story, you save refugees, or you don't. Maybe you're the guy who just likes to kill everybody and make a whole bunch of enemies. I don't know how you play, but when I play a game like this, I pick up the hero side of things, try to make everything better than it was, and typically speaking, if we're going down the basic heroic route of, adventure lore, that should be the hero's path, I think. All of that said, though, I'm getting kind of off topic. The grim, dark, dim future that is Grim Dawn is only made better by the choices that we make as the player, and potentially the choices of the characters around us as they exist in our new cycle of being. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the vagueness of the lore in Grim Dawn, and how really the lore is written in this, well, maybe it's not intentionally written in this way, but it is almost cyclical in nature. We have a being of such immense power that if he ever returns, everything dies because it all goes back to where it came from. He hits the reset button on all of existence as the inhabitants of Cairn know it, which is what the cult is trying to facilitate. But what happens when that takes place? If that were ever to come to fruition, Kymon has all of his blood back, all of creation has gone back to the originating being. Where does he go? Because the void obviously is something like a prison dimension for him. It's the hellscape that is easily traversable through void rifts that can be found in the Blood Grove and all over the world of Cairn. But I imagine that the you know, biggest being in the entire universe, wouldn't want to go back to that place. And if the universe is now empty because it's all come back to Kymon himself, there has to be more for him to do. So obviously there are other primordial beings. We don't know how they relate to Kymon. We don't know how they relate to our realm as it is, and we don't know how all of these puzzle pieces fit together. But I think it is safe to say that even if that were to occur, there would be more beyond that, more lore to know, more things to do, and that is kind of the beauty of video games and storytelling in general. But enough tangential speak, let's focus more on our character, more on what we have and the grip of the player in the experience that is Grimdawn, at least in the first 4 acts, and focus more on what the cult is doing, as well as all of the incursions of void space into our reality. So currently we are tasked with a mission from Homestead, and we need to find some farmers that the Bloodsworn, which are the human practitioners of the Chthonic cult religion, we need to find the farmers so that the Bloodsworn cannot continue to use their blood magic and the sacrifices of random innocent people to continue to bolster their ranks with even more chthonic demons. As of right now, there is a void rift in the middle of the Blood Grove that's taken us into the Ashen Waste, and this is the Void. The Void is a massive wasteland of bone and ash, and what we can only assume is the undying rage, pain, and despair of the dying or dead god Kymon. Not only that, but the Void is full of demons, and we can assume that these still come from Kymon because his blood is, as we all know, the basis of creation, and if he still exists even as a corpse, well, there are probably things that just randomly sputter to life because he is there. And seeing as how he can't die, he's a god, he's immortal, he's an elder god at that, life just springs anew in the Void because he exists there. So that's my assumption with the demons as it is, though, but there are a number of, I would venture to say, mysterious buildings and structures within the Void as well. I'm not sure if it's because the Void spills out into normal Cairn space, and maybe buildings from Cairn get sucked in, or maybe these structures exist from other worlds that the Void connects to. Maybe there isn't a one-to-one connection between the Void and Cairn, but maybe the Void is the great underneath realm that exists throughout multiple dimensions, universes, worlds. However, that's just a theory, so don't take any stock in that if you don't want to. Obviously, I could do a little bit more reading on the lore side of the Void. Actually, I may end up doing that the further we get into this playthrough, but speculation as it is right now. So, all of that being said, the Void is a big, scary place full of big, scary beings, mainly the dead god, who just continues to create more and more demons. Knowingly or unknowingly, it's impossible to know. But we can really draw a parallel to something like Diablo, in that Diablo and the greater or the primevals, the larger demons in the world of Diablo, all stem from greater and greater demons. They go back to Tathamet, the great dragon, and the parallels between that game and this game, and maybe all action RPGs, if we're being honest, are pretty cool in that nature, because there it is again. I mean, it just asks a lot of very unending questions, and the more vague that it is, the more the player is left to decide how things work for themselves, unless a very nice developer comes in and gives them hints about how the writing goes. But here we are. In addition to finding the farmers that have been kidnapped by the Cult of Chthon, we have also been tasked with reclaiming the honor of some of the fallen Black Legion and clearing out a lumber mill so that Homestead can build again, or, produce more defenses, I assume. They can't process the lumber without the mill, and it's the player's job to clear it from the demonic spawn. Don't get too absorbed in your mission, however, because there are a number of secret locations within the Blood Grove, and the first of which is a small island with 3 rovers selling some secret goods. Now, when you're in the Blood Grove, I'm sure you can look at the screen and figure out where we are, but there are these little peaks on the map. They're very sharp-looking corridors that you can find pretty easily. That'll take you down rivers, into pipes, and up to this little island. The secret vendor sells a number of monster infrequents and sells some blueprints if you're looking for some particular legendary items, but he does sell them at a pretty penny, so don't come over here expecting to buy like 20 troll bone crushers for recipes you need, because they're still extremely expensive. The trio really doesn't tell you much more than you already know, and other than that, they're just generally kind of atypical for rovers. They're a grumpy bunch who are taken to selling rare goods and are more inclined to kill people if they, start trouble, which is... It runs counter to the normal rover method of thinking, which is pacifism. The other secret location, however, is still off of one of these tiny little peaks. You'll find it in the map. It is under this waterfall. It is a named location and full of manticores for your manticore eye farming needs if you need a new location to do that. But this is the Shrine of the Forgotten God.
I cannot find a single reference to this stonework in any of my books. The inscriptions don't match anything in our records. In any records. This language probably hasn't been spoken aloud in over 1,000 years. What long-forgotten god was once worshipped here? And why do we know nothing about it? The hideous carvings depict a gruesome scene. Was it a wicked god? It can't be Empyrean. The 3 were never depicted in such a way, and besides, the witch gods were not known to embrace such open displays of devotion. They preferred the secret places, hidden from sight in the light of day, where their followers could practice without fear of the Luminari discovering their covens. I was under the impression that the Imperium had stamped out all the heretics in the last bloody crusade across Erlon over a century ago. The Inquisitors were quite thorough given the catastrophic death tolls recorded. Surely nobody had survived to invoke whatever power was trapped within these stones. And yet the monolith is warm to the touch, and the torches are lit as if someone visited regularly. The carving hums with strange power that sends a chill down my back. Perhaps it is best that this place be left alone, lest I stir whatever lies dormant within the ancient depths.
That singular lore note and the carvings in the wall located in the Shrine of the Forgotten God are my favorite part of this entire area, because not only are they very foreboding and spooky, they actually dive even further down into the substructure of lore in Grim Dawn than previously understood. We now have a glimpse of some type of entity or some worship or society that took place so long ago that the researchers, the scribes, cannot interpret their language without coming up with the interpretation on their own. There's no recorded record of the history that they're seeing, the engravings on the wall, all of the information that they're being tasked with. So Scribe Osterum is telling us that he feels very uncomfortable, but is still learning about something that technically shouldn't exist because there is no written history of it. That being said, it's the apocalypse. I wouldn't fault someone for not being able to find information, even if we had an apocalypse in the real world. Then again, we can only assume that that note was written before the Grim Dawn occurred, and maybe, we're picking it up off the ground, so Scribe Othram obviously did not make it. Especially if he was out there all by his lonesome, surrounded by manticores and this weird shrine. Things don't sound like they were looking good.
I've seen firsthand the cleansing power of the flame of Kymon, and will never falter in my belief. Our forces outnumbered by horrors beyond comprehension, it was then that I first laid eyes upon him. Like a shining beacon in the chaos, Father Kymon charged into battle. He was a flaming wind, scorching a forest left to grow wild for too long, cutting down the twisted and reviled roots that seek to strangle this world of light. I knew that day that he would be the one to lead us from this horror. It is his righteousness that burns through the darkness of this world and banishes the evil. I will not fail him.
And the only other thing to talk about as far as lore goes in this episode, however, is the factions that we are told to choose from. Normally, I'm going to pick the Order of Death's Vigil because I don't like being an asshole to random, groups of people for their beliefs or their practices, especially when they seem like, decent enough, nice guys. But one thing that we're doing in this playthrough is aligning with Kymon's Chosen instead, because as bad as they're more of a miniature, relatable cult of Chthon, and that is a weird parallel to draw, I'm sure, but as this series goes on, you'll get more lore that kind of makes that seem more, palatable. But there are a couple notes within the Sorrow's Bastion, with the Kymon's Chosen side of Sorrow's Bastion, and you can pull up these accounts of people who joined Kymon's Chosen or who were chosen to be a part of their cult, their faction, and they explain it in this very it's very bright, very hopeful, very interesting. As far as the tone of the game goes, it is definitely the most religious of the factions. However, there are a lot of gods in Grim Dawn, but this is the first that seems fanatical.
When the world ended, I did not know how I would survive. It was only by the grace of Kymon that they found me. Buried in the mud and rubble of my house, it was Father Kymon who knew where to find me. It was his hands that pulled me free of certain death. Now that I'm here, I pledge to do everything I can to fight this evil and to serve the cause that gave me a second chance. It is by the will of Kymon that I now carry his light to the world and save who I can. Praise be to the Blessed Father.
And with those two notes, you can see clearly this indoctrination starting to happen, this religious dogma building within people who are at their lowest point, because nothing seems like it's going to ever get better, because that is what the end of the world is for a lot of them. And they find religion easily because the religious leader, the religious fanatic, Father Kymon, is the person who saves them, quite literally, from the jaws of death and despair. So, his cult, I guess it's not a cult in the same way that the cult of Chthon is, but they are fanatics as described by other characters in the game. The the group is... It's much more interesting, I think, than the Order of Death's Vigil. The Order of Death's Vigil is much more pragmatic. Despite being able to raise the dead, they're more grounded. They're more focused on the powers that they control. The first necromancer, the beginner of their order, was a man at one point, and that really, I think, cements them as just people who wield very, very powerful magic, whereas Father Kymon and Kymon's Chosen are driven by this sense of faith and this really singular figure. So that in and of itself is it's pretty terrifying, but also very, very interesting as a concept for a faction. And in the background, we're talking to Father Kymon about his life's journey, how he came to be where he is. Father Kymon, the Inquisitor, Phaedrus Kymon, before he had this position, was studying the ancient texts the same way that our scribe from earlier was doing. He found this otherworldly presence, reached out into the other side, and from what I gather from reading this, was actually met with the ethereal presence, which sent him reeling. So he goes back to his superiors after his long absence, but things are strange, things seem weird. His leaders are sending people to positions that make no sense. Strategic positions of importance are being mishandled. So he knows in that moment what he needs to do. He's seen the ethereals before we know them to be the ethereals, so he goes on the run yet again. But with the cliffhanger that it is, I'm going to have to leave you all here, and we'll have to come back next time to continue on the path to fight the Cult of Chthon and learn more about the very mysterious but very troubled origins of Kymon's Chosen. That being said, though, everybody, thanks so much for hanging out. I will see you all next week with another lore through video. I hope you all have a good one. Peace out.